All right, I'm gonna get started now, guys. So welcome. If this is your first time meeting me, because I know some people showed up later in the semester and haven't really seen me much because I've been in the background for a little bit. My name's Ryan. I'm the vice president of Rutgers Cybersecurity Club this year, and today we're gonna be going over like Tor browser and the dark web. So getting started, I'll go over our agenda for today. Uh, so we're gonna go over what like is the dark web, what it means, how is it defined, what's it all about. Then we're gonna go over Tor in like a technical sense, how it works, how it operates, what's the purpose of Tor as a browser. Um, then we're gonna go into specifically digital privacy. It all seems unrelated, but it kind of trickles together. And like privacy recommendations for people that might want to help protect their digital privacy online. At the end, we're going to do a demo of installing Tor browser as well as accessing different dark web sites and how to go about it. We also have a bonus section at the end. I'll left out details on that because felt it kind of fun, and I don't really want to get into much specifics on that. But yeah. All right. So I've done this disclaimer before. You get it. Don't do anything illegal. Don't do stupid things. You're all college students. I expect y'all to know that. Okay. First, we're gonna go into what is the dark web. So how it's defined is it's like separated into three separate sections. So I'm gonna move the Google Meet stuff out of the way so I can actually see the image because this helps. Um, Basically, the dark web is a segmentation of the regular internet where the indexed results from a search engine can only be found using like software to do so. You can't just go on like Google Chrome, right, and just look up something that's on the dark web. It's not that simple. Not necessarily that it's hard, but you just can't do that. The surface web is only actually a small percentage of like websites and web addresses. The surface web is like basic stuff you can find online. Like you going to like YouTube.com, that's considered like service web. Deep web is things. This is also where like majority of sites are. It's kind of a mix where it's like mail servers as well as like databases, things like that. Things running on the background of like a web page. So like let's say YouTube, what they're doing on their back end, that would be what's considered the deep web. Um, as well as like other important information that's in the deep web. So it's still indexed. It's hard to find. Can't really find private info, but that's kind of where that all is. Everything's like hashed. And then obviously there's the dark web where only those in the internet who know how to access it and have to a browser can pretty much access it. No regular person's just gonna stumble across the dark web. There are actual legitimate uses of the dark web. It's not all for illicit activities, and it actually wasn't created for that either. It's initially created for the purpose of communicating and sharing file systems anonymously. A lot of people actually use it, especially in the media sector, if they're in a country with a lot of like censorship where they can't share a lot of information. They'll use Tor browser to anonymize themselves so they can share this information like documents, textbooks, or just like their own reports and findings from other parts of the world where they don't have the privilege to be able to share what they would like to normally. And the Department of Defense utilized Tor as well to create to communicate anonymously. Again, the main reason why it was created, and they continued funding the project to further advance the tech behind that. It is clear also in the last couple of years I added this addendum that like Tor routing can be reversed, so it's not fully anonymous anymore. Like there are ways to find it. It's difficult to do so, and only like companies with like tools and specific uh things built to do so can do it, but it isn't fully anonymous anymore. But again, if you're in an unprivileged area, you can still use it to trade information. It's still done to this day. Um, so here's what Tor is essentially. Tor was created as a free and open source overlay network, and it allowed for, like I said, secure communication. It was developed in the 1990s by a naval research lab. Now, I have a question to every one of you. Why would, like, given that it's related to government work and a lot of, like, private information, especially within um, the governmental sector, why do you think the Navy would specifically want to release this to the public? Like, why would they let us have access to it? Yeah.
Just in case to see like what you said before about how like some people like don't have access due to like censorship and stuff like that. The web is considered like a worldwide phenomenon.
That's a good guess, but that's not the reason. Does anyone else have another guess? Yeah.
I'd say to stress test to make sure that no one in the world can like hack into like the Tor network. Like they can access it, but they can't necessarily find the naval projects wherever like the naval ship coordinates are.
That's another good guess. For those who didn't hear on the call, basically to help test Tor. I think that was a sub like reason why they did it, but that it's not the main reason. Anyone else have any other guesses? Okay. The reason the Navy actually did it was think about it for a second. If they were to just share secret communications between each other, anyone that hacks into the Tor network, if they found a way to get onto it, if it wasn't publicized, uh, all it is sharing government secrets, right? Through either documents or like communications, whatever. By making it public, you're obfuscating that data by having a bunch of different people use the service and having all those people sharing information. So it makes what they're doing even more hidden on the network. So that's the main reason why they did it. It's to help themselves actually be hidden. Um, it's continued to be maintained by the Tor project and is still supported to this day through the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So here's how it works. It uses something called onion routing, which in itself is a like type of protocol that allows like the transfer of information. This image on the right here, that's how it kind of works. You can see it's kind of like an onion, which is why they call it that because it has layers, right? You go through each router layer to be able to get into the wherever you're trying to access. So specifically, each client has three keys, so the three layers that they have to go through before they get to like a specific route. And a layer is striped, so it then passes the node on anonymously through each one. So they get like a fake IP address, they send it to each node, and each node cannot communicate back and forth. So that's what creates the anonymity because you can't. There's no communication between each other, and it's completely separate. The entry node sees the address of the input node, so like when you're trying to connect to it, and yeah, as it even says here, there's no correlation. The output cannot see what the input is because of those layers. Specifically, how Tor works itself is it establishes a SOX proxy and with an application, which then routes traffic through the Tor circuit. The SOX proxy is on the layer 5 of the OSI model, if you know what that is. I'm not going to go specifically into that. That's something that could be further researched on your own. But yeah, so basically it allows you to communicate with a hidden service that both the client and server have separate Tor circuits with a middleman to the Tor network. So again, nothing gets seen. One flaw, of course, is as it says here, users can be anonymized if an adversary somehow is able to listen on the entry point and the exit point. They can see it. And to show what the routing looks like, I'm gonna pull up Tor really quickly so you guys can see like specifically if I go to a site how it does those layers. I'm gonna use a virtual machine to show this as well. It will take a while. I will note that because it has to route through everything. So just bear with that in mind. I don't know. Let's just say I want to go to GitHub, something random. Right? If I just search that, am I even on the? I think I'm connected to Tor. It's weird. You can use Tor as a browser without connecting to like a actual. Yeah, it's connected. Okay. So yeah, it's gonna take a while to load. Actually, it took quicker than I thought it would. And if you see here, you can see the circuit for something on DuckDuckGo.com to get to where you are. So the browser in the Tor circuit is the first node here, and then you have the bridge, which is what you're trying to get through to get to your access. Then it has two different routes it goes through. In this case, it went from the United States to a Finland server, and then to DuckDuckGo. Each time you do, it's going to be randomized. It's now he's going to be United States. Now he's going to be Finland. It's the whole point. It's supposed to anonymize it because you're not knowing where you're routing from. And yeah, that's pretty much that for now. Okay. So yeah, even this image shows at the top, like I said, that entry device. So when you're sending data through the Tor network versus receiving data, that's kind of how the process goes. There are multiple actual applications of Tor, surprisingly, other than like the Tor browser, obviously being the most known one. There's actually file sharing through the Tor system, following the same idea, and that's through something called Onion Share. There's also network anonymization through something called Tails, and then finally, there is a mobile network traffic anonymizer called Orbot. I personally haven't worked with these. I kind of just like know about it through research and what I've been previously told. But you can kind of assume, like the other methods, of course, it's gonna be slow. It's not meant to be fast. It's just meant to create a secure line between whatever you're trying to transmit in terms of data. All right, so now going into digital privacy. Um, this section's more going to be just like recommendations and what I personally and others think uh, is the best way of practicing like digital privacy online if you're like paranoid about your information and data being out there. Uh, First, we have to define privacy, of course, because everyone has a different personal definition of what they consider to be too much or too little privacy. You have to define that by your own like how you think about privacy. Um, and you can do that by defining your threat model. So what you consider to be a threat to you, right? Do you want to stay private from like ads and trackers on sites, corporate surveillance, like seeing what you're doing, censorship in certain regions or region locked content, things like that. Um, and like I said, each person has to define that for themselves. You know, it's not like anyone can tell you what privacy matters to you. That's for you to decide. Um, Also, one thing to note, privacy and security are not the same thing, right? You could do something to help with your privacy, but make yourself less secure, right? So, like a good example of this would be like, let's say I want to, I don't know, trying to think of a good example where privacy wouldn't be really helpful in this. Um, can't really think of one off the top of my head, but there are examples. I mean, most things you do, there is that chance of like if you're trying to help with privacy, you're probably going to hinder yourself in some other way, whether it be like your ease of use or easeability of what you're trying to do, or even something like security, because it might genuinely just like impact your security level. Okay, here's a good example I can think of actually. Let's say you're using like this is a really advanced thing, but like let's say you're using like ocular tracking to like be able to like uh connect into a place, right? Just a random example. Uh, that requires you to use a webcam, right? Security wise, it's really good because it's really hard to track your ocular data other than like yourself, right? Similar to like a fingerprint. But by you doing so, you need to use a security camera or you have to be able to use a camera. Well, if you're in your privacy definition, you're afraid to use cameras and you're afraid that someone's going to tap into it and be able to spy on you, then you're now limiting yourself in terms of either privacy or security, depending on what you find more important in that scenario. Uh, Before I continue, any questions so far? Cool. Okay. So here, like I said, is where we get into some of the recommendations. For operating systems, Windows and Mac OS are, as you know, probably closed source. You can't modify it, can't really do whatever you want to it. So it can't be private because obviously they're going to collect your data. Microsoft and Apple pretty much we know for a fact collect everyone's data, right? Especially that's why you have like Microsoft making like Windows free, right? They're trying to nothing's necessarily free. They're doing something to make it free, right? And their way is harvesting data. Um, my recommendation personally, again, this is like I said, not that necessarily you have to do it, and not everyone does, and there's other ways you can go about doing it. But my recommendation would be Linux, just because it's still intuitive and easy to understand, and still works relatively fast once you can get it set up and know Linux well. Um, the paranoid recommendations is something if you're like really afraid about them tracking you would be like Tails or QuebsOS. Again, haven't worked with them, but I know they're like really secure, but it's not worth learning all that. For web browsers, this is obviously the biggest form of like where you see privacy being concerned because everyone's really afraid of what their web traffic being tracked. Of course, that's why a lot of people use things like what's it called, incognito mode. Fun fact, by the way, incognito mode, all it does is like hide your stuff on history. They still collect the data completely, Google. So if you like look up anything on incognito, it's still completely seen. It's not hidden at all. Um, but anyways, Google we know 100% collects data. They've admitted to it. They're honest about it. They know. Um, my recommendations would either be Firefox or Brave. I personally use Brave as my web browser, but the thing with Brave is it's still built on Chromium. And what Chromium is like Google Chrome's model of how they did it. They made their code open source so anyone can make like a web browser with Chrome. Uh, so there is that likely chance that even if you're using Brave, Google still probably gets some of the data and is able to collect it. There's no guarantee with that. The only one I necessarily would say is a little bit safer is Firefox, which you can configure to be super secure. Um, and obviously, like I said, Paranoid, you can use Tor. However, it's not worth it for the average person. And to actually show, I can show you on Brave, like, there are settings you can change to make things more secure. So they even have a, where is it? Yeah, they have a privacy and security section, so you can, like, have your own safe browsing protections, obviously, whatever DNS you're using. You also disable JavaScript, which is a way for attackers to be able to get onto your web browser through a site and, like, get malware on your computer through JavaScript. So you can disable sites from that. And like I said, there's a bunch of other things. I don't got time to go into all of it. You get the point, though. Same thing with data collection. You could delete all of it if you don't want them collecting your data. Of course, like I said, there's no guarantee that that's all your data. They still probably collect stuff. They're just not telling you. Yeah. So, yeah. So for configuration, this is kind of where I should have gone into explaining all that. You can use uh things like uBlock Origin to get rid of as like an ad blocker because ads usually contain that malicious JavaScript code I was talking about, as well as they can have cross-site scripting trackers. NoScript is a plugin that completely disables JavaScript from running on a web page, but it breaks a lot of sites because some sites require it. And then also there are configuration scripts, specifically in Firefox. I know it's easy to change for recommended set. Yeah, they even say here for Firefox for changing settings. It's good to do that because then you, like I said, can follow specifically what settings you want for your terms of privacy. And it also helps reduce fingerprinting, which to quickly explain what fingerprinting is like the um, availability of like how easy it is to trace what you're doing, right? So if you're leaving like think about it, fingerprints all over, quote unquote, you're kind of allowing people to like see where you're going, what you're doing. If you're trying to reduce that and reduce what people can see what you're doing, that's the best way to handle that. All right, so onto the demos. First one is simple. I'm not actually going to download it because I have it already on my laptop, but uh, it's downloading to a browser. Like any other browser, there are some minor configuration changes you can make, and Tor is very simple to download. You literally just go to the Tor website, which here I think has the link as well anyways. Yeah, so you just go to torproject.org, and you just download it for whatever version you're on, whether you're on Windows, Mac, whatever. It's pretty simple. There are some configuration changes, like I said, that I will show. I'll actually show them now through my virtual machine. That I do recommend being made just if you're trying to completely anonymize yourself on Tor. I mean, I shouldn't say completely, but to better anonymize yourself. So if you go to settings, similarly to things like Brave and all that, you can disable a lot of like JavaScript related stuff. Yeah, it should be in privacy and security, same idea. Yeah, you can get rid of site data, all that stuff, obviously. Authentication for some of the onion sites you can access, and as well as obviously the permissions for everything you're using. And then there are different levels like of pre-made security stuff that you can enable and disable through them. But again, that's up to everyone's choice. And of course, at the end of it, you have your connection to the Tor network, which has a lot of settings you can change as well to basically configure how Tor is connecting to your internet, which of course would be beneficial if you're trying to anonymize yourself. Through Tor, the way you access hidden sites is through .onion links. So they're literally called, like, instead of .com, it's .onion, right? Those are your hidden services, the hidden things you'll see. And now